Good morning, everyone. We are, of course, in a new classroom, which is a little bit jarring, but we are actually being recorded on YouTube, so I think that's fun. But I did promise Gary I would self-censor myself because I might have a few politically incorrect statements, but who cares? So, this is God of Vindictive Volley. We are in week 2. And kind of like the first little bit, I want to kind of just talk on something that's not, it's related to the class, but not really the meat of the class because people come in and out. So this is kind of just a little side issue that I'm hoping to only spend like 5 minutes on. But it's kind of the idea of what's wrong with subjective morality. If you remember, we had a list of topics that I say we need to avoid, and one of them is we need to avoid subjective morality. And the reasoning for this is because it puts you in a really bad position, honestly, where you technically, since everything is subjective, you don't really have the right, or you can't judge people because everything's subjective. Because I could believe something is morally correct in my opinion, but you could believe something is morally incorrect in your opinion, morally correct in your opinion, and we could disagree on that front. And this gets really interesting when you take it to the extremes, and where I find this to be very fascinating is there was this debate on is the New Testament evil between, I forgot his name, James White, thank you, and David Silverman. I was remembering David Silverman, but not James White. But there is, in 2010, and it was this whole discussion on, is the New Testament evil? But David Silverman actually believes in subjective morality. And James actually pushes him on this. And what I find really interesting is in the debate, Mr. Silverman actually admits that he cannot morally judge World War II Germany because in their outlook, like especially the leadership, what they were doing, they thought they were morally correct, right? So that is the unfortunate position, which I find interesting that he's then throwing moral accusations at the Old Testament, but he's also saying that World War II Germany, in his worldview, did nothing wrong, which I find very sad place to be in. But this is the unfortunate position you get yourself into, is that you have to basically defend statements like that. Most people would, hem and haw and try to avoid the issue. I appreciate his honesty, saying that, yeah, if you take my morals or my worldview correctly, that's where you have to go, even though it leads you to a terrible position. So, again, this is why subjective morality is probably in my opinion, one of the worst morality systems that is prevalent in today. But since we have finished that, I think we will move on to where we were last time, is why is there suffering in the world? If you remember, I stole this from Reddit. Basically, they originally said evil, but really if you look probably at what this person was going for, they were talking about suffering, so I changed all of the evils to suffering. But this is their argument, is that suffering exists in this world, and how could an all-knowing, all-good God allow that to happen? And I think this is something that a lot of atheists believe. It's like, how can you, they would argue that this is logically incoherent, but I think we need to look at where suffering comes from in order to first answer this question. So there's actually 5 places where suffering comes from, okay, like the origins of suffering, okay? So the first one, okay, there we go, now it appeared, is others people sin, right? So this is, of course, pretty obvious. The best example is Cain versus Abel, right? Cain killed Abel. His sin led to Abel's suffering and his actual death, right? So, other people's sin, your own sin, that's another one that's pretty obvious. You can do things that, cause you to create suffering. I feel like this often happens more often than not, and people like to pretend it doesn't. But your own sin will cause you suffering. The effect of the curse of sin on the world, this is kind of, in regards to birth defects or, medical issues that often can be from sin in the world. If you remember where the time where Jesus was healing the man, and they asked him, it was like, oh, who sinned, him or his parents? And God said, or Jesus said, like, it was to bring about the glory of God, but that is of the, if you think about what he's saying there, that's from the curse of sin, but I'm going to heal him to bring about my glory. Fourth one, the devil. Pretty obvious. The devil causes lots of suffering. He is the prince of this world, and he has the ability to cause lots of suffering to both Christians and non-Christians. But I think what I say is the most important one of them all is the final one, and that is actually God himself. So these four things up top, the other people's sin, your sin, the effects of sin on the world, and the devil, all have to be allowed to happen through God. You look at Job, and you see the devil has to go to God to get permission to impact Job's life, right? He has to go there to do that. And then you look at, say, like Joseph, where he, you have his brothers sinned against him, their sin cost him suffering. But at the end of it, he says, you meant this for evil, but God meant it for good, right? And so you see that throughout the whole of the Bible, but I think my personal favorite verse for this is actually in Lamentations. So if we could turn to Lamentations 3, and can I get a volunteer to read? Luke, can you read verses 25 to 40? Awesome. Thank you. So if you look there, specifically, we're looking at 37 and 38. In those verses, you see that this blatantly lays out that, especially in 38, that is not from the mouth of the Most High that both calamities and good come from. I think in the NSAB, they say both good and ill, which actually kind of sounds a bit better. But you see in this verse, and if you think about what's happening here in Lamentations, right? God has brought Babylon to Jerusalem to judge them for their sins, right? So he's using a wicked nation to judge Israel, and that caused a lot of suffering, right? If you read what happens, it's a pretty tragic and terrible event. But God is allowing that suffering to occur. And if you look at 40, that's the reasons why suffering happens is because we are supposed to examine ourselves and go back to the Lord. Israel was a very sinful nation. They have abandoned the Lord. And so God brings apart this suffering in order to do that. Another verse that, or another part is, another couple verses that I think are really pertinent to this is in Isaiah 46. So if you can turn there, and if I could get someone to just read the whole chapter, that'd be awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Brent. Yes, 46, please. I should turn them.
Bel has bowed down, Nebu stoops over. Their images are on the beast and the cattle. The things that you carry are burdensome, a load for the weary beast. They stooped over, they have bowed down together. They could not rescue the load, but have themselves gone into captivity. Hear me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel. You have been burdening me from birth, and you have been carried from the womb. Even to your old age, I will be the same, and even to your graying years, I will bear you. I have done it, and I will carry you, and I will bear you, and I will rescue you. To whom would you liken me, and make me equal, and compare me, that we would be alike? Those who lavish gold from the purse, and weigh silver on the scale. They hire a goldsmith, and he makes it into a god. They fall down, indeed they worship it. They carry it upon the shoulder and bear it. They set it in its place, and it stands there. It does not move from its place. Though one may cry to it, it cannot answer. It cannot save from his distress. Remember this, and be assured. Cause it to return to your heart, your transgressors. Remember the former things I have long passed. For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is no one like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things which have not been done, saying, my counsel will be established, and I will accomplish all my good pleasure, calling a bird of prey from the east, the man of my counsel from a far country. Truly I have spoken, truly I will bring it to pass. I have formed it, surely I will do it. Hear me, you stubborn of heart, you are far from righteousness. I bring near my righteousness, it is not far off, and my salvation will not delay. I will grant salvation in Zion, and my glory for Israel.
Awesome. Thank you. So this is, in this verse, God is basically chastising the Israelites for, as you can see, they are taking their gold and taking it to metal workers and making idols out of it, and they're praying for salvation. This is actually a prophecy about Cyrus, and prophesying about what they'll do is they'll pray to these idols, like, please deliver us from Cyrus. And of course, it won't come about because it is the will of the Lord that Cyrus goes through and conquers these nations, including conquering Babylon, which is holding Israel. And God says, if you look at the verse where he says, a man from the east will fulfill my destiny, fulfill my purpose. Wow, I've missed that. What he's talking about there is he's Cyrus, who is not, he does not believe in God, right? He has his own idols and his own things. He was a man who said, he would say, I would do what I can because I was given this. This is my right to take, right? But it all is there to work out for the purposes of God. So we see that God uses, sins of other people or their, pride and everything like that to bring about suffering for other things. Make sense? Any questions? Yes.
In Job 2:9, when Job's wife says, curse God and die,
Mm-hmm.
and then he turned around and tells her, basically calling her a foolish woman, what shall we indeed accept good from God in that adversity? Accept adversity. So another verse where it shows God gives good and bad.
Yeah.
Adversity.
Yeah. No, Job is a really good really good book if you want to dive deeper into it. I think you see how God talks about how he orchestrates everything for his purposes and how this was used to work in Job's life, right? But also today, we're able to read the story of Job and I think work through our lives and see how, suffering is all planned out by God, right? And so again, the question is why is suffering, why does God allow that to happen to us? There's some that are still on there. Okay, ignore the bottom part. Man, I'm just having weird technical difficulties with this. So that won't make sense until later. But we have to remember that the suffering that we experience is basically, very short, right? If you think of in math, if you ever take a finite number and you divide it by infinity, does anyone know what it equals? Anyone? Take a shot at it. You take any number, the biggest number you can think of, and divide it by infinity. Luke.
Like 0?
It equals 0, right? So God, I think we sometimes miss this when we're in the moment of suffering, but God has an eternal outlook on our lives, and I think we need to have it also. And if you look at Corinthians, he says, for our light and momentary troubles are to achieve us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, eternally speaking, everything we go through here is far outweighed by what God gives us in eternity than any suffering we can experience now, right? No matter the hardest suffering you could experience in your life is only temporary, right? And you have to remember, you have to have that eternal view. And I think it actually helps when you are going through suffering is you have that eternal outlook, looking forward and trusting in God that he will rectify these things, right? Also, again, as I said, just we're saying that God will rectify everything, right? Of course, in Revelation, he talks about wiping away every tear. And there'll be no more death or mourning or crying in pain, for the old order of things has passed away. So all suffering will go away in eternity if you are a believer in Christ. And so when you deal with that, you're dealing with suffering, even though it's allowed for by God, you have to remember it's, that's how it will go away. And the reason for is the final one is that suffering is supposed to drive us to be more like Christ, right? You look at great heroes of the Bible and they go through immense suffering, and then it makes them more like Christ and how it can lead them to that. I mean, if you think about it, if you had an easy life and you never went through suffering, you look at people who have millions of dollars and stuff like that, and I don't need God, I have myself, right? Their pride blocks them from seeing that, no, you need God in every situation. And that's where suffering comes in. And, it's supposed to mold us and refine us to make us more like Christ. Are we good? Any questions? It's a quiet day. So, now we're going to talk about this idea that I think is pretty prevalent in today's society. And it's this idea, why does God allow good things to happen to good people, right? I said that backwards. Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? That wouldn't make much sense if I said it the other way. Just quick show of hands. Has anyone ever had anyone have this said to them? I'm not surprised by that. Anyone else? Okay, so good number of you. And I think I will say I'm going to probably take this in a bit more quick way. I would probably, if you have someone asking this and they are not a Christian, you should spend more time than I'm going to spend on this. But I guess here's the question. What is good, right? We think of people that we say, oh, this person's good, right? A lot of times you hear, all the good people like Gandhi and blah, 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 blah. But the question is, and most people would say, oh, are you, if you ask someone, are you good? You ask a random person on the street, they would say, yes, I'm good, right? There are some people that say, no, I'm bad, right? That you would have to approach a bit different. But I would say the vast majority of people would say they're good. But you say, well, what's your standard, right? It's like, well, I'm better than Hitler, right? Not a hard standard right there. But that's often where people go, I'm better than this person, I'm better than this person, right? But our standard is Christ, right? So when you compare yourself to Christ, everyone, it's basically, it's the opposite of that Hitler standard, right? Everyone falls short. No one makes it. And we can see that Christ, when he's here on earth, basically many times says that there's no one that is good except for God alone, right? And you see that basically when, what is this one? This is when the rich young ruler, he says, he comes to him and he says, what do I need to do? Good teacher, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And Christ starts probing him, and this immediately responds. He says, why do you call me good? There's no one good, or there's no one good but God alone, right? And you look at what is Christ trying to get him to do? He's either trying to see the truth that Christ is the good teacher, he's God, or that or reveal his heart that he does not actually believe that, right? And of course, as we see from the rest of the story, this man did not believe that Christ was God, because immediately afterwards he stops calling him good, right? But what we get from the greater meaning of this chapter is that no one is good. None of us are, right? When you compare ourselves to God and his holy law, we are all fall short. You can take the 10 Commandments, right? So has anyone lied? Show of hands. Wow, that's everyone. We all fail, right? Because the standard is if you lie once, you are a liar, right? And you have failed in God's command. You can even go, have you murdered? Hopefully no one raises their hands. But then, have you hated your brother in your heart? I feel like we could all raise our hands for that one. So we've all committed murder. And you can go through every single one of the commandments, and you can find, yes, you have fallen short of that command, right? And that's just the 10 Commandments, right? There's plenty of other laws that we have all fallen short of. So we have all, hated our brothers, committed sins, and, I'm sorry?
In speed.
In speed?
In speed.
Yeah.
Going over the speed limit.
Oh, yeah. We're all... Huh?
Stepping on some toes, I think.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. But we've all fallen short of that law. And of course, again, in Matthew 7, we see another verse where he says, if you being evil know how to give good gifts to your kids. So he's just saying, right out flat, everyone is evil, right? He's not evil. There's no caveat. There's no nothing. He says basically, if you, being evil, can know how to give good gifts to your children, right? It's there's no, everything. He just basically shoots it all down. So really what ends up happening with this question is, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? Well, this is this question makes no sense, because there is no such thing as a good person. Everyone has sinned. So then, really, if you can want to turn the question on and said, why does God give good things to evil people? He's just laid out that we're all evil, right? We all have fallen short, right? So so the question really should be, why does God give good things? That's what we call this thing called common grace, right? Because God allows the rain to fall on both the wicked and the just, right? And so that's how I would approach the question. Anyone have questions? Luke?
This doesn't seem unfair to me, or not make sense to me, but I can see how lots of people who don't believe in Christ would still be very outraged by this.
They would, and when you approach them, I would not do it in such as a blatant as manner as I have. I've kind of blown through this, but you can take it. I would recommend, if you're doing that, you can take it softly. But how I've done it in the past is you kind of just kindly ask them kind of what I was doing. You talk have you lied before? Have you done this? Have you done that? Right? And then you start picking away at them and you've done this, that. And then so do you really still think that God sees you as good? Right? And most people, not all, but most people tend to say no, I would agree that God would probably see me as evil. Right? And so you if you're dealing with an unbeliever, you need to approach it with a much lighter touch. So you need to approach it with a much lighter touch, but it's kind of the same process with this. It's you need to show them that there is no such thing as a good person, and that these bad things, and more often than not, you also have to look at it is everyone likes to blame their suffering on God, right? Because they don't want to take personal responsibility for their own sins or other things like that. Yes, Mr. Anderson.
A lot of the arguments you're using here, you're
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you could go to all have sinned,
Yeah.
and all are condemned in that way. The Old Testament, even our righteous acts are filthy in God's eyes. So there are declarations that would be very strong that way.
Oh yeah, totally. There's plenty of places you can go with this question, right? Yes.
I have two things. One is that there's another instance that Christ said that sometimes the suffering is not the fault of anyone.
Mhm.
It is just to bring glory to God in a moment and was for a reason. Secondarily, I think that with what Luke was saying, this is a thing where people can come to this question and then receive further condemnation by their choice based on rebelling against this
Yeah.
or going toward God. And so it's often with this where people then are condemned because they refuse to be under God in that way.
Yeah.
That's a gift of the Spirit that we understand.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Well, yes, Luke.
Therefore, because the person who's probably asking this question is coming out with the logic that bad things should happen to bad people, when you
The-
shift the perspective that God sees all people as evil,
Mhm.
that's kind of what the argument is.
Yes. Yeah. So the argument would be you want to shift their perspective because you want to shift their perspective that there is no such thing as a good person, right? And then go back to that everyone deserves condemnation, right? But of course, then you can go into the gospel at that point and ask. But you don't have to go through that. You can have your sins forgiven by Christ, right? So, cool. Okay. So I have found that when you do this, or a kind of another question that kind of I feel like rides on the coattails of this, or maybe comes first, depending on the person, is then why does God not judge bad people immediately? I actually taught this in Heather's Sunday school class, so that's why I'm using bad people. I had like a bunch of big words I can't even remember, and she's like, "No, you got to get rid of that. 5th and 6th graders aren't going to understand this." So, but I feel like this is kind of a question I think even we can be, we can fall victim to, right? Someone like is doing evil things in the world, right? There's plenty of people. You just look at the world and you can see horrible, horrible, evil people doing horrible, evil things, and you're like, why does God not strike these people down, right? There's people that are, just do all sorts of horrible stuff. And I'm forgetting all of them at this moment. But okay, let's look at someone. Like, think of like Hitler or Stalin or stuff like that, right? These are people that, I guess Hitler, his life wasn't fully lived out, but Stalin lived a full life. He died of old age, right? And he did horrible things. He killed millions of people. He caused genocides and famines and stuff like that. But he lived a full life, and he had a life of lots of luxuries, right? He did, he lived a lavish life, and he never was struck down, right? But again, I think if we look at Psalm 7, or 73, not 7, that would have been a completely different thing. You can see that this man, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. I tried once and I failed utterly. But this man is basically, he is struggling with this idea. Like, he sees wicked people, and they are profiting from their wickedness, and they are, oppressing the righteous through their wickedness. And he's like, God, why do you allow these people to live and prosper and continue to do so? But what we see then at the end of the verse is that that he realizes that God will eventually judge these people, right? That they will be put before God. They will stand before God himself and be accountable for everything they've done, right? And so that's what you have to kind of remember with this. And I'm assuming you all know this, right? This is not too far off from, this. I'm hoping that this is nothing new for anyone. But you have to then, if you're dealing with someone like an atheist in this situation, you have to say, God will eventually judge everyone, right? For every deed we do, the small to the little. All of these people that we see are doing horrible things, they are going to have to stand before God and be accountable for everything they've done. And I personally believe in the Bible that there is actually different levels, maybe not levels, but different punishments in hell, depending on the severity of, your life, right? I probably shouldn't go into that too much deeper because that's not partial to this class, but God still will judge these people, and the vast majority of them will be sent to hell, right? Good? Yes?
Do you get that concept from Dante's Inferno?
No. No, Dante's Inferno is just a fanfic. It's a hot mess. Don't read it, is basically what I would say. Yes, Luke.
Basically, to sum it up, why exactly doesn't he judge people immediately?
Why he doesn't judge people immediately? Because God wants the world to come back to him, right? So he gives people, so there is no excuse, right? When God judges people, he gives them mercy by not judging them immediately, right? And you also see if when you're talking about the Israelites going into the land, God says, I'm not going to let you go in because the sins of the Canaanites have not fully been, their sins have not fully come to fruition, right? So God allows people not to be judged immediately because to leave basically the opportunity for, of course God already knows, but to basically come to Christ and come back to him. Yes, I don't know why I snapped. This is just a weird day, I'm sorry.
The wages of sin are death, so the first time we sin, just having a sinful nature would be doomed from them. So
Oh yeah,
if God judged bad people immediately, every single one of us would have been judged before we had a chance for salvation.
exactly. Yeah, if God at this moment judged everyone for their evil deeds, we're all gone, right? Of course, we have Christ, so we've been forgiven. But yes, you are completely right. If God judged everyone immediately, it's over. Connor, I did it again. What is wrong with me?
There's also something to be said for the idea that, this goes along with the whole idea behind why we're not supposed to take our own revenge. We are leaving room for God's judgment not only to come to fruition in eternity, like we were saying earlier, but, we get the idea from Romans 1 that sometimes allowing somebody that, you mentioned it as a grace time, it can be the complete opposite.
It can.
Be opportunity for that person to continue to snowball and incur a greater judgment upon themselves. Sin as almost a consequence to sin.
Yeah. I can't remember the verse, but there's that verse where it talks about heaping coals on their head, right? That their sin can become, they can incur a greater judgment. I think also, I've been picking on Stalin all day because I've been thinking about him, apparently. But if you look, say, let's take Russia, the USSR, right? Stalin, this horrible, horrible human, is oppressing everyone. He's oppressing the Christians there. But when the USSR breaks apart, a lot of missionaries are able to go now into those countries that were a part of the Eastern Bloc and start preaching. And what they find there is that they're small because he tried, part of communism is removing religion from the system. So Stalin was trying to root out and get rid of all religions. He wanted this atheistic society. But you had these groups of Christians that were there, and while they might have not been as theologically deep with things, they had very strong faith. They had some of the strongest faith that some of these missionaries had talked about. So you have this evil man who is oppressing these people. You also see it in ancient times with Nero, and it allows people to build faith that they couldn't have if they were trying to do it on themselves, right? Yes.
When I think of punishment, God allows us to do things, but when I think of punishment, not punishing me can be punishment in itself.
Yeah, it can be.
You know, so if I'm allowed to continue in my sin, God, like you said, God's going to allow me to go down a path, and you know, I can either choose right or I can choose wrong. But you know, not punishing me can be punishment in itself.
It can allow where it talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. It allowed them to go into their debased practices where they just got worse and worse and worse, right? And that was their own punishment because they live in a society at that point that, if you read like what happened with Lot, these were not good people, right? And they were, I mean, you don't see much of it, but a lot of times when you see societies that kind of fall into their own sin and just kind of spiral, they abuse each other, they harm and do all sorts of stuff to one another. Sometimes the punishment is, you know, the people around you basically doing the things that you are doing to, that you were doing to them.
And
right?
We may not see it as punishment.
Yes, yeah, we often don't, right? So, I thought I saw a hand. Luke?
Just to let you know, the name that you're mispronouncing is Asaph.
Asaph.
He's one of the writers of the Psalms. And
Yeah, he wrote a lot of them. I am terrible with names, though, so don't ask me to pronounce anything. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the part where we talked about, so we kind of talked at the beginning about the sin of the natural world, right? You know, the creation groans, right? Or I said sin, I meant suffering. The suffering of the natural world. You know, creation groans for Christ to return, right? And so why does God allow suffering to come from natural disasters, right? And I mean, it doesn't even have to be natural disasters if you really think about it. It can be, you know, you can get suffering from being attacked by an animal, or you can have suffering if a tree falls on your house, right? These things, if you know, go to insurance, those things are called acts of God, right? So why does that type of suffering happen? And what I find really interesting is, I'm forgetting the book, but there's this Jerry Bridges book where he's talking about suffering, and there's this rabbi, right? And he actually would argue that God does not have control over the natural things of this world, right? Which is a terrible idea because the Bible, of course, goes against that, but it's what I would call the easy way out, right? I think a lot of times that's kind of the, you know, well, God can't do this, so that's the easy way out. We don't have to actually address this. But what we can see basically is, I think, this is how I take it, is when you have these natural disasters, you kind of, this is the Colossians verses to basically talk about like God having control over everything, right? But I think there are times where God uses natural disasters to judge people for, like, you know, judge countries or the communities where these happen for their sins, right? That's what basically is happening in Revelations. You see that there is these calamities, and I'm not saying that this is the norm. This is, of course, happens, I don't think, very regularly, but there's these calamities, and these are there to judge these people for their sin. That also happens with Sodom and Gomorrah, right? You have this God causes calamity to happen. It was more supernatural than what we would normally think of that. But that is used to judge people. I'm not saying that this is the norm, right? Just because there's an earthquake in a place doesn't mean that God is judging those for those people, right? But I think what's more important than any of that is this constantly reminds us of the fragility of life, right? You look at these things and you see people who have these accidents or who have these disasters, and people who die, right? And you have to think, like, that is a soul that is now lost, right? That's no longer, like, you know, no longer has the chance of having the gospel preached to them, right? And I think that is really what we should get down to, is like the fragility of, like, life is so fragile, right? I mean, I think we get a little desensitized to it because you hear about, like, you know, all these, like, car accidents and stuff like that. I guess car accidents tend to be more people's fault than anything else. But you have these things where we kind of encourage us, like, yes, life is very short and very fragile. We need to go out and reach out to these people, right? So, are we good? Any questions? Yes?
Just a comment. I think this is what you're driving at, but, you know, it seems to me that a lot of the stuff, I don't disagree that sometimes God judges by punishing,
Yes.
but everybody dies. That
Yeah.
in itself is a judgment. But bad things happen to believers and unbelievers the same as everything. And I think from a large perspective sometimes that, all of this is meant to either bring people who are not close to the Lord to Him, or remind those of us who are. That when we look at the life, and some people in here have had very, very hard things happen to them, and it makes us all sort of yearn for the time when the Lord does come back.
Yeah.
We have a tendency to be complacent when things are going well for us in the lives that we have here on earth, and that's not for us. We all should be desiring to be with the Lord, and I think this, as you're saying, kind of, that these things that happen remind us that this isn't our home.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that is a big point that we need to remember with all of this, is that this was not in God's original creation. Suffering, death, destruction, that was not originally there, right? And you're right, like when we see this, it should cause us to mourn the fact that we have, we live in a fallen world, right? And that we should be with Christ, right? Or with God, like, how it was in the garden. But yeah, do you have a question or are you just stretching? Okay, Bethany.
So when you're, let me say it like this, and you're studying for this lesson on punishment and suffering, did you see any distinction drawn between suffering for a believer and suffering for an unbeliever?
Yes. So the distinction I would say is the suffering for a believer, it is there to make us more like Christ, right? You hear about the things of like God uses suffering as a refining fire, right? So that is, as a believer, that is like, what's the goal, the end goal of suffering is for that. Where as an unbeliever, it's the suffering is there to basically bring you to God, right? Like that's kind of, I know it's kind of sounds similar, but it's different, right? In the sense of like, there can be things where I would say, like, if you are suffering, like as a believer, there can be sufferings that as they draw you to Christ, it could be in a specific area that, so like, okay, let's say you are, hypothetically, let's say there's a control freak, right? There's a person who really struggles to let go of control over things, right? And a lot of times, if you look, and I've met a lot of people who were like this, and a lot of the suffering they experience is when kind of their whole world falls apart, right? They lose control, right? And that's kind of the thing that they're saying, I'm struggling because I'm losing control over this thing. Well, what that's trying to do there is God is trying to work in that person's life to put their trust in God and not in their own control, right? Where as an unbeliever, suffering is there to like, hey, this world is bad and evil and corrupt, right? And so this should draw us to God as that thing. Does that answer your question, or you want kind of more in-depth than that?
I'll come ask you.
Okay, cool. Yes.
One of the things that I don't remember who it was, I want to say it was Paul, he did so much, but mentioned that we can share in Christ's suffering when we suffer, and that in itself is a good thing.
Yeah.
And I always struggle to understand what that meant, but our little bits of that can kind of give us a feel for what he went through, and in doing that, a better understanding of Christ and how he didn't even deserve any of it.
Yeah.
So,
Christ is the only person in history that never deserved his suffering. So we are running, like we are over time, so I'm sorry. I know I just saw 2 hands shot up, and but I think we are unfortunately out of time for today. So, But next time, if you guys want to learn a new word, we're going to talk about gish galloping. So that'd be fun. Very exciting.